Hello and welcome to 18 WJTS in.form. We're back with our usual discussion with Jan Dougan, the Extension Educator for Purdue Extension in DuBois County. Jan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bill.
It's always a pleasure to have you on the show, and today we're going to talk about home food preservation. You say you've been getting some calls about that, people wondering a little bit about food preservation.
Yes, we have a number of individuals who are either doing home food preservation for the first time, whether that be canning or freezing or drying, or people that are taking it up again because they've got gardens, and even though the gardens maybe haven't been so bountiful this year, they want to take care of what's there and they want to preserve it so their families can enjoy it this winter.
Is it easy or hard to preserve at home?
Well, some things are easy.
Okay.
What's most important, though, is that you follow research-based, reliable information. And there's a lot of information, as you know, on the internet. But just because information or a recipe or directions is posted to the internet does not mean that that is approved directions or reliable information or a process that you would want to follow to safely process foods.
Things have changed a little bit since my grandma preserved. Is that not true?
That is true. So, and when you think about some of the changes and why those changes have taken place, I mean, first of all, some of the varieties of produce that we grow is different. So when you think about tomatoes and you think about when you were a kid and the acidity level of tomatoes were a lot higher than those varieties that we're growing now. I know my husband tells me about he could only eat tomatoes for so long because then his mouth would get sore, and that was from the acid in the tomatoes. So today that doesn't happen because the acidity level is lower. And when we select the process, whether we're going to process foods under pressure or we're going to use a boiling water bath canner, we make that determination on the acid level of the foods that we're processing. So since tomatoes are lower in acid than they used to be, we process them differently than what we used to process them. So it's just really important to stay current, to stay up to date on any of the procedures that you're going to be using to process foods. And it's really important to get those recipes, those directions from reliable research-based sources.
Okay, and you would be one of those sources.
Yes. You could call me at the Purdue Extension office. You could give me a ring at 812-482-1782. You could go online and Google National Center for Home Food Preservation. And that center is at the University of Georgia. The University of Georgia is a land-grant university, just like Purdue is a land-grant university. Their extension program is out of the University of Georgia, and Elizabeth Andress is an extension person who has been there for many years doing research, updating recipes. You can search their website for any produce that you want to put up, whether you want to freeze it, whether you want to can it, or whether you want to dry it, and the information and the directions will be there that will give you a safe product for your family to use.
I'm thinking back that canning I always knew, or preserving I always knew, was basically tomatoes and pickles, and it was in a jar, and that was it. But I guess now we freeze a lot. Drying seems to have become more popular, and I guess really you could can anything. Is that not?
Well, there's some things that the home canner cannot do. One of the things that I get a lot of calls for is like chicken noodle soup. They want to process their own chicken noodle soup. And really, you can't do that in the home situation because we cannot get the heat high enough because the density of the chicken noodle soup in the jar is too dense and the heat can't penetrate that concentration. There are several products like pumpkin that we don't want to puree and then process at home. We could chunk it but not puree it because, again, the density is too dense for the heat to penetrate and have a safe product to use.
Okay.
So and people make choices. I mean, freezing has become very popular because it's easy, it's quick. A lot of produce that we freeze, we need to blanch first. And blanching is a process that we put let's say we're blanching corn. So we put the corn into boiling water for a specific amount of time and to stop the enzymes from growing in that corn. Then we would cool that corn. we would drain that corn, and then we would freeze that corn. So that's a process that we use when we freeze. Not all products have to be blanched. Tomatoes don't have to be blanched. So you could just, you know, if you have extra tomatoes in the garden, you could just chop those up. You could throw them in a freezer zip type bag. You could put them in the freezer. You could use them for stews or soup or casseroles later on. Now you know it's not going to be like cutting a fresh tomato anymore. It's going to be a little mushy, right? But it still can be used, and it would be a safe product to use. Green peppers, onions, or other produce that you don't have to blanch. And that's because research has been done and we've discovered that it's not necessary to have a good product. Now you know you don't want to freeze or process more foods than what your family can actually eat in a year's time, because there is a limited shelf life for foods that we put in a freezer. I have charts in the office. If someone wants to know, I can tell them what the recommended length of storage time is. Again, that information would also be on the National Center for Home Food Preservation website. If it's okay, I'd like to share with the viewers a couple other resources. So this is a resource I keep on my bookshelf, and it is the So Easy to Preserve resource. This is available from the University of Georgia. You can purchase it directly from them online, and then you have a paper resource on your bookshelf. You know, the internet's fine to go to, but sometimes maybe it's slow or it's not working so great. So I like to have a reference that I can pull out when I'm in the kitchen, and this is a great reference to have. We also have in our office for sale the Complete Guide to Home Canning, which is the USDA guidebook. This is also available to download, or you could go and pick any section that you want and copy and print just that part of it. But we sell these in our office if you want a paper copy for $15, and that's just our cost. We don't make any profit or anything on that. That's another good resource. And then if you're in a retail store, you can probably find the Ball Blue Book wherever they sell home canning supplies or home food preservation supplies. And this book is available, and it's a great, reliable research base. What I find is in the Ball Blue Book, if you want to get a little bit fancier, if you want to have some unique items, some unique jellies like, you know, jalapeno jelly or strawberry rhubarb jelly or something like that, you might find a more creative recipe in the Ball Blue Book, where the other two guides, the Guide to Home Canning and the So Easy to Preserve book, are some of your basic information that you need to have to actually process your food safely.
Okay, now I know sometimes you have to use lime, right?
That would be in pickles, pickling,
why are you
and
putting lime
it's pickling lime. It's not just any lime. Okay,
Okay.
you have to buy the
Might make a
product
difference. Okay.
that's made for safe home food preservation, and that would help to crisp those pickles up. So yeah, there's a lot of products that are out there. There's a lot of products that are safe to use. You know, one of the questions I get a lot about adding products is salt. And people think that salt is a preservative, and it is a preservative when we're using it for certain products. But you don't have to add salt to your green beans. You don't have to add salt to your tomatoes. You don't have to add salt to those products. That's just for flavoring. So if you're trying to cut your sodium, as we've talked about on some of the shows, you don't have to add that salt to a number of products that you process. But again, check your resource. Check your reliable research-based resource, your directions, your information, to find out why you're adding those products and whether it's necessary or not. The tomatoes that we talked about earlier, it's advised and strongly recommended that we need to add acid to our tomatoes when we process them. So you can buy products that you can add, or you can use lemon juice, or you can use vinegar, because those are acids that we have on our pantry shelf. But the amount depends upon whether you're canning pints or you're canning quarts. So you need to check your directions to see how much you would have to add to have a safe product. And that's the whole idea. We want healthy, wholesome foods, but we want to make sure that they're safe for our family.
Now, you also can freeze.
Yes.
But freezing's a little trickier.
Why is freezing trickier?
Well, because
what are you thinking?
If you're going to do green beans, you can't just throw them all in a bag and just pop it in the freezer. You should freeze them individually. Is that right?
Well, actually, if I were to freeze green beans, first of all, I would prepare them, wash them, and blanch them, and then I would cool them, and then I would package them in freezer zip type bags, the amount I wanted to use for a family meal. I would label them, green beans. I would label when I process them, when I put them in the freezer, and then I would try to use them up within the year's time.
So a marker is an important part of
a
preserving.
Smartie. You got to have one of those smart markers.
To be able to write. But is there some things that you should freeze individually before you?
There are some things that you can freeze individually that then when you, if you think about, you want to just take a few out. So like green peppers, for example, if you have a bountiful of green peppers in the garden and you like to do pepper halves, like stuffed peppers, so you might want to clean your peppers, wash them in cool running water, slice them, dry them, and then lay them on a cookie sheet, put them in the freezer. Then within the next 24 hours, take them out of the freezer and package them in a zip type freezer bag or another freezer, appropriate freezer container that you could put them in and freeze them. Then you can just reach in and take out, you know, if you're just making 4 for the family, you can just take out 4 and make them. And then that'll be easier to get them out and you know, when you want to use a smaller portion. You can do the same thing with blueberries are a great thing to freeze like that. And when blueberries are in season, when you clean them and wash them and rinse them, let them dry. I like to dry them on paper towels, make sure I get all the moisture off of them. And then I put them on a cookie sheet in the freezer to freeze each of those berries individually. Then I package them in a freezer type bag. And then in the morning, I love blueberries in the wintertime. On my cereal in the morning, and I'll take a scoop of those blueberries out of the bag and put them in the freezer in my cereal. If you would put all the berries in the bag and freeze them like that, you'll have to use them all at once because they'll be all stuck together.
Now, getting the water off is important because otherwise you get that frosty stuff in there.
Yeah, and some frosty stuff is okay, but some, when you look at some items, it could be an evidence of freezer burn, that you've had it in the freezer way too long. You know, that's another question we get in the extension office about freezers and using freezers and storage of foods in freezer. And if you get a product out that's been in longer than it's supposed to be, it's not that it's probably an unsafe product to use, but the quality of the product is not going to be very good. So if you see items with freezer burn on it, that taste is not going to be good. It's not going to be a quality product that you want to prepare and that you want to serve your family.
Well, I think I was going to ask, but you answered it basically. Sometimes you get things that have that freezer taste to them.
Yeah.
And that would be because you've had it in there too long or too much water or something like that.
Right. And you know, that's another thing when people choose not to blanch the recommended produce that's supposed to be blanched before freezing, you can really get an off flavor because the enzymes don't stop growing, so the produce keeps maturing, so it just doesn't taste very good. Now, you know, you could throw that in stew, you could throw that in soup and maybe not notice the flavor as much, especially if you throw in some herbs and make it a little bit more flavorful dish. But if you're just gonna, if it's a standalone thing on your plate, you're gonna be like, man, this does not taste very good.
And then you'll get discouraged and you won't freeze or can in the
future.
So do it right the first time, then you'll always have a good way to go.
Right, right. So what we want everyone watching to remember is use reliable research-based information. If you don't know how to process something, give us a call at the Purdue Extension office. We'll be glad to share those directions with you. And if you have a dial gauge pressure canner and you haven't had it checked for a while, give me a call and we can check that dial gauge and make sure that it's accurate, because if it's not accurate, you could have an unsafe product that you're serving your family.
Okay, and you'll do that free?
Yes, we will.
Call you and bring it in.
That's right.
Okay, right. Do you have a stove right there in your office?
I wish we did have a stove, but we do not. But the dial gauge, we just check. We don't have to bring it up to, we don't have to utilize it on a stove to check it. I have a piece of equipment that I can check it for accuracy.
Well, Jan, thank you very much for coming in.
Great.
Our guest has been Jan Dougan. We've been talking about home food preservation. Please make sure that you check with Jan or go to a reliable source to make sure you're doing it safely. Jan Dougan is the Extension Educator for Purdue Extension in Du Bois County, and I am Bill Potter, thanking you for watching WJTS in.form. We are local people watching local people.